Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Galucki. Welcome to the 560th Imagine Buffalo program and our 182nd YouTube program hosted by the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thanks for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or C-SAAHN, as I like to pronounce the acronym, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Now, before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation as time allows. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channels. And please, we hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speaker. Joining us again today is Mark Goldman, who will continue his provocative discussion from last week about the works of Buffalo's renowned AKG Art Museum. He is calling this presentation Provenance, How'd They Get Here? Where Are They From? The backstory of some of the masterpieces in the collection of the Buffalo AKG Art Museum. Now, Mark came to Buffalo, we said last week, over 50 years ago. He has been studying, writing, and presenting on Buffalo's own histories ever since. His history books, many of which can be found in the Buffalo and Erie County Public Libraries, include Albright, The Life and Times of John J. Albright, Tilly, a New York City Girl, 1906 to 2001, and his Buffalo quadrilogy High Hopes, The Rise and Decline of Buffalo, New York, City on the Edge, Buffalo, New York, City on the Lake, The Challenge of Change in Buffalo, New York, and City of My Heart, Buffalo 1967 to 2020, his most recent book. Mark is credited with playing a major role in revitalizing the cultural life of downtown Buffalo as owner and operator of the Calumet Arts Cafe in the Theater District, one of the first rehab building projects to take place on Chippewa Street. He also ran Allen Street Hardware Cafe with his son Charlie and the Allen Street Art Collective. Now, I will also say on a personal note, I've used 10 words to describe this Buffalo Chautauqua idea, and Mark exemplifies them. It's to explore American legacy through place-based lifelong learning and imagination. And that's exactly what Mark has done with his books and in this presentation. So let's give another welcome back to Mark Goldman. Mark, take it away.
Yeah, Dennis, thanks very much. This is interesting. I just came out of a funeral, so I'm sitting in the parking lot of a synagogue on Sheridan Drive. But it's, it should go fine thanks to the technology that you guys have. So this work that I'm doing, as Dennis says, it's sort of the effort to get the backstory behind some of the more interesting pieces in the collection of the Albright. We said last week, I started in the beginning in 1862 when the Buffalo Fine Arts Academy was founded, and there's about 10 chapters that take us up to the present. So we covered the first few last week, and I just want to start today on, I think it'll be maybe chapter 6 or 7, but it's the name of the chapter is called The Yellow Christ, a Mirror into the Holocaust. Now here's this picture. And we know it's maybe the most popular, or certainly one of the most famous pictures in the collection. And while there is some reference to the backstory in the archives of the Albright, I've done a lot of background on it, and it reveals a fascinating story about 20th century European history. The painting, we learned, was owned. It was bought from the Gauguin family by a guy named Paul Rosenberg in 1928. Rosenberg was the leading dealer of French modern paintings in Paris. He was Picasso and Brock's and Matisse's exclusive dealer in the 20s. Rosenberg is descended from an Alsatian Jewish antique dealer family that came to Paris in the early 20th century. And by the 1920s, he is the #1 dealer in Paris. Rosenberg didn't sell this painting, he kept it through the 20s, through the 30s, until July of 1940, and you folks all know what happens then. June 14th, 1940, the Nazis take over Paris. On July 4th, actually, in 1940, they established this ERR, which is an effort to confiscate any and all cultural artifacts that belong to Jewish collectors and Jewish dealers. So one of the first places they go is to Rosenberg's gallery in Paris, and they begin day 1 or day 2 in early July. They take about 400 paintings off the wall. One of them is Gauguin's Yellow Christ. Rosenberg himself manages to get out of Paris, get out of France, manages to come to the United States in the fall of 1940, and I do tell that story, how he got out, how he got his visa, comes to New York, opens a new gallery in New York in late 1940, and as soon as the war is over, he makes every effort to reclaim his collection, and he's successful to a certain extent. One of the paintings that he does reclaim is the Yellow Christ, which in 1946 or 47, I don't have the exact date, he gives to the Albright Art Gallery. So that, we look at that painting, and what I'm trying to do is get beyond what we see on the canvas and go back as we've just done. So I do that in a great deal of detail. The next series of, then I'm jumping to the 1950s. The next chapter is called Lightning Strikes, one day in March 1956. So if we could look at that first slide there, Joy, which I believe is the Pollock conversion. So what is this all about? And what's the backstory here? We're talking about 3 or 4 paintings in this one chapter. One is the Pollock, and the next one, if you don't mind scrolling to the next one, the next one is, what's the next one?
Gotham News.
Gotham News by de Kooning. And the next one is the
Exuberance.
Exuberance by Hans Hofmann. There's what happens in April of 1955, Seymour Knox hires as the curator, the director of the Albright, still called the Albright, a guy named Gordon Smith. And Gordon Smith is very connected to the New York City abstract expressionist movement that was just beginning to emerge in the late 1940s. And Knox is an extraordinarily open, easy to excite guy with a lot of money, great curiosity. And Smith and Seymour Knox start going to New York in the winter of 1955. And they go to galleries. And one of the galleries they go to is a gallery that belongs to a guy named Sidney Janis. Sidney Janis, as you may know, is a Buffalo boy. His name was Janowitz. He's the first generation, again, a Jewish immigrant, grew up in Buffalo, who goes to New York in the 1920s. He gets very, very interested in the art scene in New York in the 1920s. He married a woman in New York who's very involved in the arts. And in the 20s, Janis starts building an art collection. And he goes to Europe. And so, and what these 3 pictures give me an opportunity to tell the Sidney Janis story, which has never been told here. There's very little, there are records from the Janis gallery, but his children, who are quite old at this point, are not interested in sharing any of it. So I've had to do a lot of digging. Janis, by 1932-33, is the major collector in the United States of contemporary art, the major guy. And he's also a scholar, and he is very active in the new Modern Museum of Art. The Museum of Modern Art, which we talked about last week, is the first president of the Museum of Modern Art is a Buffalonian named Conger Goodyear. So there's this Buffalo connection at the MoMA in the early 1930s. 1947-48, Janis says, I want to open my own gallery, which he does. And he joins the host of galleries that are on New York's 57th Street, the Sidney Janis Gallery. And Sidney Janis becomes one of the first galleries in New York City to show the work of a group of painters who become known in the early 50s as the New York School of Abstract Expressionists. And they're totally off the radar. They're all, as one critic said, all the great work in contemporary art is being done below 14th Street in New York. They're all living and working below 14th Street. Hans Hofmann has a school there. De Kooning has a studio there. Jackson Pollock has a studio on 8th Street. And so this area in the East Village primarily, and the Village, becomes the focal point of this emerging new group of American painters: Pollock, de Kooning, Mark Rothko, Arshile Gorky, Ann Hoffman. So who has them all? Who's dealing these guys? Sidney Janis. So we have Seymour Knox and Gordon Smith going down to New York in the winter of '55, and I don't have any records. I don't have any smoking gun. I don't have any hotel bills. I don't have any canceled checks. There's no record in the Albright of transactions, which is hard to believe. I don't have any airlines tickets. I don't have any recorded conversation, but I know they went. So I'm assuming a certain kind of transactional conversation was being had. These guys go visit Sidney Janis in his gallery in maybe November, December 1955. Again, no concrete evidence. And the first picture Sidney shows these guys is a Hans Hofmann. And then he shows them a de Kooning. Then he shows them a Jackson Pollock. Then he shows them an Arshile Gorky. And he was a dealer. Do you want to buy these, you guys? What? And they think about it. Let's start small. Let's just take one. So December 1955, they buy the Hans Hofmann. It's called Exuberance. And so they buy it, and they said, well, let's get back to you, Sidney. We're not ready to, pull the plug yet on all these guys, pull the trigger on all these paintings. So they bring a Hans Hofmann back, 1955, end of 55. Then, how did this come to me? I was going around the gallery, and I always look at the cards, the sign cards. And if you look at the Jackson Pollock Convergence, that massive piece, then you look next to it, you see a Franz Klein, New York is called. Then in the other room, you see a Mark Rothko, orange and yellow. And then you see in the other room an Arshile Gorky. And what do these paintings have in common? They were all bought on one day in 1956. That blew my mind. March 13th, 1956, Seymour Knox bought all of these. He hesitated at first, bought the Convergence, then, all right, you got me. I'll go. And so then he goes and buys all 5 of these paintings. And as a result of that sort of real stroke of entrepreneurial genius, he then have the leading collection of abstract expressionism in the country. So can we see all those slides, Joy?
Yes.
Yes, they're all up right now.
So nobody has this extensive, even though it's only 5 pieces, these become the base of an extended collection. As if you'll go with Dennis on his tour, you'll see there's Joan Gottlieb, and there's Helen Frankenthaler, and there's many others, not Joan Mitchell. So 55, late winter 55, early 56, foundation of this collection is bought, and in the subsequent years, he adds to them. Now, the next chapter after that, these chapters run about eight or 9 pages each. So they're kind of short and comprehensive, but they're telling things that people have never seen or heard about before. The next chapter is, again, it's called, it's not, I forgot exactly what it is. It's maybe 1962. And I'm not sure that I've already used the term lightning strikes. I got to come up with a term. In 1962, the whole world turns in Buffalo in 1962. And one of the things that happens in January 1962, of course, is the Knox wing open. So we now have the Albright Knox Art Gallery. Another thing that begins to happen in 62 is Seymour Knox is now, what is he buying? He's buying pop art. And the next few slides show the pop art that Knox is buying in 1962. He goes to New York and he buys a Marisol. He goes back to Janus and he buys a Warhol, and he buys a Wesselman, and he buys a Rosenquist, and he buys, I can't think of them right now, the rest of them, but in 1962, many of them again in one day. I mean, Seymour, I think, was a restless guy, probably didn't have much patience, and he would just, all right, give me all the holes. And he would buy 3 or 4 paintings at a time. And that's also true of some of these pop art paintings. So these acquisitions are made in 1962. In 1963, he's the first museum, by the way, is now we know, the first museum to show a Marisol. Seymour buys the General from a small gallery in New York called the Stable. He buys the Generals in late 62. In November, this is really kind of, it's fascinating, conversions, if you will. In November, it's November 22nd, on a Friday night, November 22nd, the day, of course, that, like other, will live in infamy, the day that Kennedy's assassinated. The pop art show, it's called the New Realist and Pop Art Show, opened at the Albright. It's the first museum show of pop art in the United States. So, you know, I don't know if those of you here last week, the first photography show in any museum in the United States is held. It was in the Albright Gallery in 1911. Now we have the abstract expressionists, the first major statement of abstract expressionism. 62, the first major museum statement of pop art. So just quickly, listen to 62. You got the building, the Knox building is built, the pop art show. What else in 62? This private college called the University of Buffalo becomes part of the state system, and all of that implies. And in 62, Lucas Foss is hired as the music director of the Buffalo Philharmonic. So you have in place, by the end of 1962, all of the elements that make for a renaissance of modernism in this, what was unfortunately a dying metropolis. So there's an interesting irony there. So why don't I stop and let you guys ask questions?
Wow. Let's get ourselves up here. Mark, that's a whirlwind. Tell you what, summarize that again, the difference of the 1955, why that was significant, the paintings, you know, in terms of the paintings acquired, and then the 62 pop art, again, because these are these are the foundational pieces of the AKG in many ways.
Yeah, and they're acquired. I don't know. We'll never know what was motivating Seymour Knox. He's apparently a Sphinx-like figure, but he was, you know, people will argue that it wasn't really Seymour. It was this, that, but he was the guy who wrote the checks. He was the guy who pulled the trigger. He was the guy who said, buy that. You know, whether art historians, I don't know what, but I mean, a lot of people have beef with Seymour because, oh, he was just a rich banker, you know, but he was an incredible visionary. And he's behind the Room of Contemporary Art in 1939. He's behind the the acquisition of the abstract expressionists 15 years later. He's behind the construction of the new wing in '62. He's behind the Pop Art Show. He's the guy who works with Nelson Rockefeller to create the New York State Commission on the Arts. He's the first head of the UB Council. I mean, the guy is, he straddles this community like a colossus, but a very, very imaginative one. So
That's helpful. Okay, Melissa, what type of questions do we have from our audience?
Yeah, so far we have one question. Could you talk a little more about Knox's appreciation of modern art and how that developed?
well, yeah, I mean, how it developed is he probably had a good education. He went to Yale. He was a disciple of A. Conger Goodyear, who, of course, was a great modernist. Leaves, kicks, kind of run out of Buffalo and goes to form the Museum of Modern Art. And he was just an interesting, innovative guy. He was probably impatient with tradition, and he constantly was breaking ground. I don't know where he learned it. We don't know anything about him. There's no Seymour Knox journals, or there's no autobiography. There's nobody will ever be able to write a biography because there doesn't appear to be any material about it.
Hmm.
So,
Melissa, any other questions?
And what are your favorite pieces in the Art Museum's collection, Mark?
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. That's the beauty of that museum, is you just love being in the place, and there's so many. The more you study, I mean, I never really paid any attention to pop art until I got into it. Now I'm thinking, wow, those cans are amazing. I love those Campbell soup cans. I never paid much attention to abstract expressionism. I thought it was beyond me until I started in the last couple of months, learning about it. Now, in this guy Michael Opping, who was a curator here under Doug Schultz in the '80s and '90s, he's one of and he was at the Albright. He was one of the leading experts in the country on abstract expressionism. So, you can learn a lot from that homegrown institution. And when he retires, Josh Allen is going to become the next curator. So I don't go. Yeah, I'm sure you all go and
Well,
enjoy it.
any others, Melissa, that are coming in? Maybe we can keep chatting and prod some. We've got a couple minutes.
Yeah, so some of the works that you discussed today were purchased by the museum in the same year that the artist completed them. How does the museum buyer find the artwork so quickly? Is that a normal turnaround time for a big name artist?
Well, these were not big name artists at the time. So, the Jackson Pollock probably sold for about $2,500. Today, that's the most valuable piece in the gallery, in the museum. It's probably $150 million. So they were not big name artists. And I think that had to do with the relationship with the gallery guys, Sidney Janis and a guy named Coots. These are gallery people who his business is based on close, and Martha Jackson, of course, who we haven't even talked about. These are people whose business is based on maintaining close relationships with artists. So, Pollock would finish a painting and he'd give it to whomever he had to deal with at the time. It's like Picasso and Paul Rosenberg. He'd finish the painting and he lived in the same apartment building as Paul Rosenberg. He'd bring it over to Paul. And so I think that's probably true with when an artist has a good close relationship with a gallery. Works that way. They weren't sitting around those paintings, right? 1 year they're sold right after.
Yeah. When the new Buffalo AKG Art Museum opened, the big attraction was the Clifford Still exhibit.
Oh, right. We haven't talked about that. Right.
And somehow those people you're talking about, the were enlightened enough to make inroads with a very inward type of artist that didn't
Yeah.
want his work out there. I always liken it to pages in a diary, that he didn't want to just
Yeah.
sell those pages.
Right.
So that we bought two, and that the trust was created, had to make a mark in the art world,
Absolutely.
well beyond Buffalo, I would think. And he donates 33, and as the world has come to find, we've got the second largest collection next to the Clifford Still Museum in Denver that has 95% of his work. So
It's the same with Marisol. I mean,
yeah,
Knox buys a Marisol, and she never forgets it. And when she died, 40 years later, she leaves everything, including her underwear, to the Albright. She left everything to them.
and to reinforce it, that exhibit is going on in the new Gunlock building. So take advantage.
No, it's over.
If you haven't seen it,
It's out. It's over. It's over. It's over Monday.
Oh, I'm thinking that's still going on. I've got to double check.
So yeah, I mean, we've it's a remarkable history, the history of this gallery, and it's been wonderful for me to get behind it and learn more about it. It's just the operations of it, how it has functioned over the course of 100 years. It's extraordinary.
Well, and what you pointed out last week, Mark, was the year 1862, 100 years before the importance of 1962 and the new Knox building. But that literally, from everything I understand, from birth, from the library system, all these groups spun off. Our Museum of Science. Right. There's a civil war going on in the country, and here we're blossoming our cultures. And that truly is why I believe strongly that our future strength lies in appreciating the culturals. Every town has cultural organizations. Don't get me wrong, but ours are really have a story for our size, and they are our legacy from all those millionaires that used to live here. They seem to condense around the art galleries important ones, and we have that legacy.
And just to put this in the context of the Central Library, we now call it Central Library. These are the Natural Science Society, the Historical Society, the Buffalo Fine Arts Academy, are offspring of what we now call the Central Library. They came out of and they lived in the library till the end of the 19th century.
Well, to a degree, knowing that reality, I thought maybe in a digital age we could create a platform from the library that reconnects them all. And that's what this Imagine Buffalo program has really been about.
Wouldn't that be great?
Well, that's what's going on with this program. In my mind, at least, we have speakers coming in from art, architecture, history, nature, and do the best we can to reconnect it digitally, if not physically.
So, gentlemen, there's one more slide left, Mark. It's the Degas. Do you want to talk about that at all?
No, I think that would be redundant. We don't need to. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, thanks so much, folks. Appreciate it.
Mark, I thank you very much. And it's been a wonderful two-part series. Folks, if you missed the first one, go back, get some in the library's YouTube archive, and worth seeing, as are the other 180 that you'll find exist or so. So I'm going to mention our speaker next week, and thank you folks for joining us for this very special episode. Next week, 21st on Zoom, we'll hear from UB Professor Carrie Winter about imagining freedom in the age of revolution. Carrie is let me get her title. She's the Professor of American Studies, Department of Global Gender and Sexuality Studies. And that will be next week. So join us then. The following week, we have Superintendent Williams. So make note of that and plan join us for both Tuesdays coming up here in January. Folks, thank you again for making this possible by participating. And again, our hats off and thanks to Mark Goldman. Take care. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well and have a good day.